Okay guys, so we are going to start our next TEK, which is groundwater and surface water in a watershed and how human activity affects this. In this PowerPoint, the orange words are going to be the most important ones. There is a lot of information. Please do not feel the need to write everything down, but definitely write the important things in the yellow words down. Okay, so let's talk about what is groundwater. Well, groundwater is water that comes from the ground. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Amazingly, people use groundwater every day, but in fact, half of everybody in the United States drinks groundwater every day, but they don't even realize that they do. Groundwater is even used to irrigate crops, which can grow food for tonight's dinner. So pretty much all you need to write on this page is the definition of groundwater. So where does groundwater come from? Groundwater can come from rain, snow, sleet, or hail that soaks into the ground. Pretty much when any form of precipitation, so we are going to kind of review on the water cycle a little bit, hits the ground and it absorbs into the ground, it actually gets stored into what we call a water table or the watershed that happens under the ground. As water moves down into the ground because of gravity, it passes between particles of soil, sand, gravel, and eventually rock until it can reach depths of the ground is filled or saturated with water. This is called the water table or groundwater. The area that is filled with water is called the saturated zone, and it is on top of which is called the water table. Makes sense, doesn't it? That the top of the water is a table. The water table may be very near the ground surface, or it could be hundreds of feet below. It all depends on where you are located on the water zone. So what is a watershed? Here you go. Definitely write this down. A watershed is the land area from which surface runoff drains into a stream channel, a lake, a reservoir, or any other body of water, which can also be called a drainage basin. So a watershed is an area of land that drains water into a bigger area. So we know that little streams can combine to make big streams, and they can combine to make rivers, and rivers can empty into lakes. So all of that land around those areas is considered a watershed. A basin is the entire geographical area that is drained by a major river and its intersecting streams. In every watershed, there are small streams that flow into larger streams, which can flow into rivers, lakes, and even bays. The smallest streams on the outer limits of the watershed are what we call the headwaters. Headwaters are the source and the upper parts of the stream. So if we were to look at this picture up here, notice right here we're getting into bigger lakes and all the water's drowning. Up here would be considered the headwaters. Notice the white area is showing you the watershed. That is the area of the land. So what is a watershed? The headwater streams have no tributes and they are carried first order streams. All other streams have them. Second order streams form when the first order streams meet. Okay, so it is a stream that flows into larger streams or to a body of water. So here's a picture of the watershed diagram. Notice how you can have precipitation coming down, you can have runoff, you can have drainage, you can have percolation where the water drains into the ground for the groundwater. So do we live in a watershed like here in Gregg County? Do we live in a watershed? All land is part of some watershed. So think about it. Are there any rivers or streams that are near us? Not only do rivers and streams flow into collecting basins, but also they impact humans and how they impact the water bodies. So human activities, they impact the quality of the river water flowing into the basin, also impacts the basin itself. Do we cause a lot of pollution? Do we litter and cause a lot of trash? These are human activities that we're going to talk about. So notice we are East Texas. We are actually right here is Gregg County. So we're considered in the Cypress area. We know that we have the Sabine River correct, that if you are heading towards the airport, you're going to pass over the Sabine River. We also are by the Cypress River. So this is a watershed that we are considered to be located in. Okay? So think about it. Have you ever dug a hole in sand that's near an ocean or a lake? And think about it. What happens if you keep digging? Well, eventually you're going to reach water. And the water that you're going to reach, well, is that groundwater? The water in lakes, rivers, and oceans is called surface water because it is on the surface of the earth. It is not deep, deep down. Groundwater and surface water sometimes can trade places. Groundwater can move through the ground and it can move into lakes and streams. Water in the lakes can also soak down into the ground and become groundwater. So think about a long time ago when people had wells. Well, what would happen is they would dig a hole hundreds and hundreds of feet or maybe just a few feet depending on where they were located until they would hit the groundwater. So wells were made and like well water is groundwater. Rivers, streams, lakes, that is surface water. So where is groundwater stored? Groundwater is stored in the ground in materials like gravel and sand. It's kind of like the earth is a big sponge holding all the water. And the water can also move through the rock formation like sandstone and other cracks in the rock. An area that holds a lot of water, which can be pumped up with a well, is called an aquifer. Wells pump groundwater from the aquifer and then into pipes to deliver the water to cities, houses, countries, and or crops. So this is the Earth's surface. So if we had a little stream, that would be considered surface water. Well, when any type of precipitation comes, it moves through the ground, gravel, sand, which is called percolation, all the way till it can hit the level, which is groundwater, which is, here's an example of a water well. So how does groundwater fit into the water cycle? Well, the water cycle is also known as the hydraulic cycle because hydro means water. The same water is cycled on Earth since the beginning of time. So the same water that you could be drinking today is the same water that dinosaurs could have drank 100 million years ago. So here are the steps of the water cycle. You really don't need to write this down. You should know the water cycle by now in 7th grade. You have evaporation, condensation, precipitation, runoff, which is where water soaks into the ground. That is important for the water cycle. And then eventually how it can move down into the streams, into the ocean where the evaporation comes off. So what happens to groundwater? Most groundwater is clean because it did just come from precipitation, but groundwater can become polluted or contaminated. And you're right, human activity is what leads to that. It can come polluted from leaky underground tanks that are storing gasoline, from burying things in landfills. When people apply too much fertilizer or pesticide to their yards and they water them, that can be washed down. When pollutants leak, spill, or are carelessly dumped onto the ground, they move through the soil. Because it is deep in the ground, groundwater pollution is generally difficult and very expensive to clean up. So it takes a lot to pollute our groundwater. But once it does, it is very, very hard to clean up. Sometimes people have found new places to dig a well because their own became contaminated. So this is why it's so important that if people change their oil at their house, you shouldn't pour it down the drain. Anything that you're pouring down the drain, like if you're cleaning paintbrushes or pouring chemicals, eventually it can make its way into the water table. And if it pollutes our whole water table, it's going to pollute the water for us to drink. So now let's mainly focus on human activities. Human activities that commonly affect the water table can be the disruption of the water, the quantity or quality of the water, or the chemical quality of the water resources. Human activities can include agriculture, urban development like building cities or industries, drainage of low-lying areas, constructions of levees, dams, reservoirs, the removal of vegetation from floodplains, and also one that are not including is building asphalt. Because if we put concrete and asphalt all over the Earth's surface, we are blocking a way for water to move through the ground to get back to the water table to refill it and restore its plenage. So every time we're building roads and streets, we're decreasing the area where percolation can occur for water to move back down into the water table. So agriculture. Irrigation removes groundwater or surface water that can be used to crops to carry it away. Many farmers can use chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers when they're applying it to their crops, and eventually that can lead into the watershed, and it can also cause an overgrowth of algae in the water. And that will cause, the algae will suck up all the oxygen, causing all the fish and plants to die. Urban development, discharge from sewage treatment plants, like we're talking about industrial plants, industrial facilities, storm drains, leaky fluid storage tanks, septic tanks, landfills, all of these can add to contamination. Okay, so I kind of went fast because I didn't want it to be long, but the main thing you need to go through is make sure you did kind of record all the yellow. That was what's important. And then when we get to the human activities, definitely understand how humans are impacting our quality of water. And we're going to do a couple labs, all right? So I'll see you tomorrow.